welcome to all of you for the culmination of our journey into the new world order for our fans. I'm Gary Gardner, your facilitator. For those of you just joining us, I'm the president and CEO of Totally Access and a founding distinguished fellow for the Innovation Institute for Fan Experience. I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina, here in the United States. On behalf of the Innovation Institute for Fan Experience, we extend a warm welcome to all of our listeners from around the world. Thank you for joining us on this virtual journey as we explore the innovative pathway to the future of sports and entertainment. As a reminder, this presentation is recorded for the benefit of those who are unable to attend all the sessions at their scheduled time. You will have access to the recorded versions via the website beginning tomorrow, 19th of November, and they will be available on the VFairs website through the IIFX landing page until 18 December 2020. We will create and post podcasts for each session. All IIFX Return to Work, Play, and Spectate podcasts are available on Buzzsprout, Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. IIFX also has a YouTube channel listed under the Innovation Institute for Fan Experience. Please look for us on YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Your microphones were automatically muted when you joined the webinar. We ask that you keep them muted so that our speakers and our panelists can be heard clearly. You are welcome to ask questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom, which is located on the bottom right of your screen. The speakers will try to answer all of your questions during the session. Please know that you can adjust your view of our proceedings by making the picture appear as a full screen. If your internet connection fails, you can log in again and will be granted entry. Now, we will hear from two research visionaries in the sports and entertainment arena. They study our industry and conduct research studies to help inform the decision makers from large companies as they chart a path to the future. They also talk to our fans, and the fans are not holding back. What they are saying is there is a new world order emerging that requires some work to connect with the post-2020 sports fan. Our industry has been hit disproportionately hard by the COVID pandemic. So the information we will hear now may help us appeal to the fans who are going to enter that new normal, perhaps as early as 2021. Our presenter today is Ryan McConnell, a Senior Vice President of Kantar Sports Monitor. Let us ask Ryan to take us into the new world order. Ryan?
Thanks so much, Gary. So that was a great intro. And I have to say, I'm honored and a little bit humbled to be ending this amazing conference. And I also want to thank Lou and Chris and the whole team who has set this whole thing up. It's been incredible to see them launch this event and to partner with them along the way. And I'm really, really excited to keep on working with them in the year ahead. So you have learned a lot over the last couple days. You've learned a lot about hygiene, safety, the importance of risk, and you've learned a little bit about where things are going in the future. Our view today, I said our because my partner Steve Culp was not able to join us today, so I'm going to be carrying this load today. But Steve is in the cockpit with me as we launch this new product. But what we do at Kantar Sports Monitor is get you closer to the fan. We get you closer to their attitudes, their values, who they are down deep. And our theory in a lot of ways is if you know who the fan is, you're going to be much better suited to create the kind of advertising, marketing, new products and innovations, and everything, all the kind of consumer touch points that you need to do in order to succeed. So we're going to be looking forward. Not that anybody else in this whole conference has not been, but we're going to be really taking our futures and foresight expertise that we've learned at Kantar and looking forward into the post-2020 sports fan. Let's see here, trying to move this along. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here we go. So a little bit, before we get into what we're going to be talking about today, I want to do a little bit of background. I know that some of you may not be familiar with the Kantar name, and if you don't know Kantar, you probably don't know Monitor or Sports Monitor either. Just so you know, Kantar is one of the largest leading research, innovation, and consultancies in the world. Our mission is to understand people and inspire growth. US Monitor, some of you may know the name from way back when, called Yankelovich Monitor. That's our heritage. We've been tracking consumer attitudes and values for a very, very long time, since actually for 50 years. We're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary. So we've been, as part of this, we are a syndicated service. We basically produce ongoing data, insights in the form of content, and our consulting team. So you can turn to us if you have an issue about how people are feeling and the trends that are shaping them. So we've been in the market for 50 years on the US Monitor side. Sports Monitor is our newest baby out of the womb. It came out on March 5th, 2020, which for those of you who have repressed March of 2020, was not a great time to be launching a new product on sports, given that about a week later, the whole industry shut down. But what we've been doing, and in tandem with Lulu and Chris and the whole gang, is really understand what's going on in the marketplace today. And our philosophy at Monitor, at Kantar, is if you really know who you're talking to, you understand the audience, you get closer to the future audience, you understand their priorities, their values, their attitudes, their motivations, you're going to be much better suited to kind of answer the why about why they do what they do. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be going through our data and our insights about the modern sports fan. And when we were launching this product, and I'm not going to speak about Sports Monitor this whole time, we're going to get into a story pretty soon, but when we were launching Sports Monitor, this was what we saw. This is something that we saw last year, and I'll also read the quote right now, that from leadership, media, technology, consumption habits of fans, one could argue that it has been the most significant decade of change in the history of sport. So much has happened, it's hard to capture what it all means. And that's by David Bruton, by a partner at Bruin Sports Capital. That was last year. This year, we've been tracking the entire, you're going to see some data. And I'm going to share a little bit more about where the data comes from in a little bit, but we've been tracking lots of things in the sports world this whole year. We've been tracking it since COVID-19 hit. We've been tracking it even before that. And we are seeing things that were already happening before, but accelerating. Some worrying signs. For instance, about 1/5 of sports fans say that they expect to be less engaged with sports as a result of the coronavirus. Something we tracked last year with the youth participation is that nearly 80%, nearly 4 in 5 of Americans said that the culture of sports today puts too much pressure on winning and losing instead of fun. And then we're seeing, that something that we tracked last year was that people were more attracted to watching games at home. They weren't as attracted to going to the games. We're seeing that decline in attendance before. I think pretty much everyone but the NBA has seen a decline in attendance over the last 10 years. That's going to get worse, obviously, in the post-COVID environment, or at least as we enter 2021. So we've been tracking these issues. And we've been tracking them through lots of different ways. So, this is what you see here. You can see that we've had lots of, probably we're in the market, we're polling Americans and sports fans 6 times this year, as you can see on the screen. We've been really all about tracking how those attitudes, how those values are changing through time. And we've been, using different sample sizes as large as 11,500 people in March, to as few as 1,000 this past October. I'm going to be showing you data throughout this presentation. They come from these sources. If anybody ever wants to know more about how we collected the technical side of things, I'd be more than happy to share with you that. I figured for this audience, though, you're not all that interested in that. So that's enough about Sports Monitor. That's enough about our methodology. Let's get on to our story today. So when we talk about a new world order in sports, what exactly do we mean? Well, take a look at this slide. Imagine if you had seen that this was the year that would be coming in the year ahead if we were at the beginning of this year. If you said, wow, a pandemic is going to come. We're going to be watching games with no fans in the stadiums. The Olympics is going to be canceled, or not canceled, but will be postponed for a year. We're going to be watching, NBA games with digital fans in the stands. We're going to be watching baseball with cardboard fans in the stands, and we're going to have one of the biggest social unrest movements in our recent history. That is a lot of change all at once, and it has been not a great year in sports. You can look around. Here are some headlines. We obviously saw the sports sponsorship business, take a major hit. We saw that TV ratings for individual sports, not collectively, but for individual sports, are down. We're seeing that lots of hand wringing about the future of sports with the coronavirus, and we're seeing layoffs. And it is, make no mistake, this has been a hard year for sports. It has not been easy for anyone. And I think I speak for everyone in saying that at the end of this year, we will all breathe a big sigh of relief. That said, this is not unprecedented. Yes, a pandemic has not come and shut down the sports industry. Granted, that is unprecedented. But what isn't unprecedented is that this, at its core, fundamentally, it is a disruption. And we know how disruptions work. They clear the way for underlying trends to accelerate and become the next big thing that will shape the future. So in other words, they don't create a new world, but they do accelerate things that were already visible. And what we're going to do in today's presentation is really take a deep look at this disruption and look at 3 shifts that we're seeing in our data and in our observations. And by taking kind of a wide angle view of how things are changing in the world, we believe there are 3 changes that are on the way, and they have to do with risk, responsibility, and reinvention. So basically what we say is, due to the COVID-19 pandemic primarily, that there is a major recalibration of risk. We're going to get into that in a little bit. We're also seeing a different view about responsibility. It's less about the self-responsibility, less about kind of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and more about social responsibility. And then finally, we're going to talk about reinvention and how that is becoming less voluntary and more vital for the future. So we're going to get into all these 3 themes, 3 different sections, probably take somewhere about 10 minutes per section. And we're going to start with managing risk. So you've heard a lot about risk these last few days. That is certainly a theme of the post-COVID-19 marketplace. And we're going to be dealing with this, whether there's a vaccine comes in 3 months from now, 6 months from now, however long it takes. This is going to be something that outlives the pandemic. That is something that we firmly believe. So let's show some data. Now, this is not among sports fans. I'm going to point out when we show data that is not among sports fans. I'm weaving in U.S. Monitor data as well as Sports Monitor data in this presentation. And you can see, we have been on a positive streak with risk. If you say positive means that you're happy to take some risks for the chance to enjoy greater rewards. We have 2 statements in U.S. Monitor. You have to choose one of them, and you can see them on the left-hand side. And we've seen over the last few years, ever since, about 2014, when the economy was starting to inch up, we're seeing more people saying that they're willing to take more risks. And you're seeing that in the economy, the positive signs in the economy before COVID-19. What happens in April 2020, though? As you can see here, it went from 54% to 37%, and it's down 17%, agreeing with the statement that I am happy to take some risks for the chance to enjoy greater rewards. So that is something that we saw, and it has rebounded a little bit. We should expect it to rebound a little bit, but at the same point, it's not going to snap back to where it was. It takes time. When people feel shocked like this, they retrench. And as you can see on the right-hand side, nearly 90% of sports fans today said things feel out of control in the country. Now, that was done in October of 2020. It was right before the election. Things did feel quite out of control, but I'm not so sure they're feeling all that much in control today, even after the election. Obviously, that's still being determined. So risk has returned to American life in a big way. And when you think about sports fans, you might not think that they would be so happy about living under restrictions, under COVID-19 restrictions, wearing masks and social distancing. They like to touch each other. They don't really like authority. They like to, referees are not their favorite people in the world. And they like to gather in large crowds. So it's basically the profile of a super spreader in a lot of ways. That said, we've been tracking their sports fans and how they've been feeling about COVID-19 for this whole year, as I shared a little while ago. And one of the things that surprised us was not only that they are equally, with the rest of the population, with non-sports fans, but they often are more cautious and more worried about their health than non-sports fans. So, we asked a question a couple months ago about, since COVID-19 started, I'm feeling more cautious in everyday activities. You can see that's nearly 2/3 of sports fans agreed with that statement. Now, not that much more than non-sports fans, but where you see on the right-hand side of the screen is that sports fans are more worried about their health. This is a group of people that is actually very cautious and very mindful of their health, maybe a little bit against the stereotype that you might think of when you think of the sports fan. Now, that is not a aberration. We like I said, I can share with you lots and lots and lots of data that shows that sports fans are more likely to be concerned about health and hygiene issues than non-sports fans. But one of the things that really surprised me and my colleague Steve when we were looking at the data was that this has been the case throughout. Even in the context of sports, where you would think that sports fans would be chomping at the bit, there are 3 months at least when no sports were on at all. And as a sports fan myself, that was tough. I was wondering whether there would be more people who would eschew or put away this idea that you have to protect athletes. I thought that it would be more of a idea that you just get out there, entertain me. That's not what we saw. We saw that 56% of fans were willing to wait longer if it meant that they would ensure that athletes and employees are assuming less risk. And then when we asked a little while later, in August, after sports had returned, when everyone was saying that there was going to be this massive pent-up demand for sports, and there was a little bit, that basically 56%, the same percentage of people said that sports returned a little too soon or much too soon. So again, sports fans have led with caution throughout this pandemic. One of the things that, beyond our data, one of the things we do at Sports Monitors, we're just always looking at what's happening in the culture, what's happening in social media. You may have seen this. This happened in September. And I thought it was a great example of how the zeitgeist is changing around these issues. Athletes are known to be, intrepid, bold. They don't back down to anyone. And Kerri Walsh Jennings, she's a volleyball, obviously a volleyball gold medalist, a visa athlete. She came forward and, it may say something about the intolerance in our culture about different ideas today, but ultimately what she said was that she's going to be brave. She was brave today. She went into a store and she decided not to wear a mask. Well, that bravery was not exactly seen as brave by her fans on social media. And she was told that basically she had to come forward and give a truce. And she said, I've been thinking about this and maybe that wasn't the best way forward. Beyond the particulars of this issue, I think it's illustrative of where we are in the culture today with COVID-19. And I think we're at a point where people are going to be taking it even more seriously in the future. That's not to say that sports fans have not been, though. So we asked in June, this is in June, so that things have changed. This is 4 or 5 months ago. Not going to say that these are snapshots in time. So this it may have fluctuated. We are going to be in the field pretty soon asking about this again. But what we found was that ultimately people do not find sporting events, concerts, or other live events without any crowd control measures. Just let them in the stadium and let them roll. That is something that only about 1/3 of sports fans say that they think is safe. Good luck getting a non-sports fan to come to the game with you too, because only 18% of non-sports fans agreed with that statement. When we asked about whether you limit capacity, if a venue limits capacity, less than 50% of people still said that they thought that would be safe. Now, I do assume that this has gone up more, and one thing to know is that people don't know what that looks like. They don't know what it means to limit capacity. Most people have not gone to a sporting event yet that limits capacity. So it's kind of on venues to really show how safe it is and to address any obstacles, any concerns that people have, because they have a lot, as you would think. The one thing to note, the one on the left-hand side about going to an event without any crowd control measures, we asked about 12 different things, restaurants, going to stores without any crowd control measures. This was the absolute bottom of the list. The bottom of our list of questions, this was the least safe. So that speaks a little bit to the long road ahead that we're going to go on to get back to normal. Just to end this section a bit, we asked in October. Before we were saying that this was in June, we asked a different question in October, and you can see on the left-hand side, it was 29% of sports fans who back then said that they, going to a sporting event would be safe. Same percentage, 29% said that they'd be extremely or very confident that attending a professional or college sporting event in their area is safe today. And again, only 9% of non-sports fans. So, this is not a time where you can think that this is going to go away and that people are going to jump right back into going to the games. You're going to have some people who will, this 29%. And that might be fine for a sport like the NFL that can, fill up a stadium like that. But other sports are going to have some problems, we believe. Ultimately, what needs, I mentioned this a little while ago, is that the American public needs to be reassured. If there's one word to remember from this section, it is reassurance. I'll say it again, reassurance. You gotta reassure sports fans to get them into the gate. And the way to do that, we believe, is through hygiene signaling and innovation. What do we mean by that? Well, it's time to innovate upon new hygiene needs. You can see some examples on this page. You may have seen some of these throughout the last couple of days, but facial recognition is coming to the Olympics. Contactless is obviously the way of the future. We're going to go to a touchless future. And that's been interesting to watch because there's a lot of privacy concerns with that. In a lot of ways, that idea that things are getting accelerated by this disruption, that's a great example of that. You may have seen a little while ago that the Sacramento Kings owner not only was instrumenting his arena with sensors, but he's also putting temperature sensors there as well to hopefully get a better gauge of where this is going. And then you may have read about the Oura Ring. That is another biometric detector that was given away at the NBA bubble. There are lots of other reasons why that was done so well. Obviously, it can't attribute it to one little thing like this, but the fact that they didn't have any COVID-19 cases in that is a major success. Honestly, something I don't think that the leagues are getting enough credit for in this environment, because I think that they've led the way in a very responsible way, yet are not getting a lot of credit for that. Anyway, it is time to innovate upon new hygiene needs. Beyond that, as I said before, it's about reassurance, delivering peace of mind. One way to do that is through partnerships. It's just kind of borrowing the equity of another company. Lysol it has partnered with Major League Baseball. Hard Rock Cafe, or Hard Rock Stadium had a global biorisk advisory council that they received. They were the first NFL stadium to receive accreditation, and so on and so forth. Basically partnering with brands, businesses that have credibility in this area. That is a way to deliver that kind of peace of mind. And then finally, it is definitely time to signal seriousness. I'm going to steadfastly avoid any kind of political commentary in this time, but I think one of the things that we have seen over the last several months is that there hasn't been as much seriousness about this pandemic in the United States than there should have been. I'm editorializing there, but the fact that we're not exactly turning this thing around, and it's November when this came in March, does say something. So, you kind of have to take a page out of the Houston Texans. Jack Easterby said this, and when they were talking about hiring a facility hygiene coordinator, that the ideal candidate is someone who wake up each morning and go to bed each night thinking about the cleanliness of the facility. In a lot of ways, you got to think about this in the way that Dr. Fauci is leading this. He's relatively apolitical, widely respected. Not perfect, but he's leading the way with signaling seriousness. So emulate Dr. Fauci, or you can always emulate Lou here, who I swear to God, are those two separated at birth, Lou and Dr. Fauci? I don't know. Anyway, just kidding, Lou. So in terms of wrapping up this section, when you're talking about managing risk, this is a question that we think you need to ask as you're looking to engage the 2021 consumer or sports fan. How can you help sports-minded consumers have a more peace of mind, assurance, and control? That should be front and center in your mind as you're looking to connect with sports fans in 2021. So our next section is about reframing responsibility. And this is a really interesting section that we're kind of taking a bit of a counterintuitive stance on this. And it's about individualism, which is a bedrock American value. Now, some of you may have heard of Robert Putnam. He wrote the sociological classic, Bowling Alone. He recently came out with a new book called The Upswing. And as you can see in here, I'm not going to get into the methodology too much, but one of the things that he is documenting right now is that individuality has basically run a little bit amok over the last 60 years, actually. That he analyzed Google Ngram, which is basically looks at all published materials over a certain amount of time and looks at the words that are in there. And one of the things he found was that almost an inverted U, in a way, is that looking at I versus we statements, that there's been a steady decline in how we talk about collectively, how we talk about we versus I. We've been going a whole lot more in the I direction of late. And that is not going to go away. Let me just say that right away. That is not, we're not looking for a sea change, flipping the switch that individualism is going to leave the scene anytime soon. You can see on these numbers, this is all US respondents. This is not among sports fans, but it's probably not a whole lot different among sports fans, is that ultimately that people are still very individualistic in their thinking. We don't see 90% agreeing with statements too often in today's America. 93% say I'd rather depend on myself than others. 91% when I succeed is usually because of my ability. So it's not going away. But people are starting to question this, the American individualism. They're starting to question self-reliance. And that is a really interesting development in some way. Now, you can see on the left-hand side some of the headlines, how American individualism has failed epically because of the coronavirus, the shift that the Americans must make to fight the coronavirus, and how rugged individualism is leading us astray. And you can see on the right-hand side that we are seeing that in our data. Now, this is over a long period of time. We can see that there, so I'm going to move my camera around. You can see right there that 1996 and 2004, the baseline for this statement, everyone should be free to do their own thing. Pretty easy statement to agree with, freedom, individuality, that kind of idea. Well, we went a bit higher historically over 2014 to 2019 period. That was being championed to maybe an excessive degree, and that has lately gone back down to its historical average. And this is from US Monitor. It is not among sports fans, I should say that. But so people are starting to question American individualism and self-reliance. We're also seeing signals that Americans are returning to a more community-minded ethos. So we asked this question a little while ago about about whether Americans feel that their values and point of view are shared by their fellow Americans. And as you can see here, it's another one of these situations where there was a historical baseline. It dropped in the 2015s, later in the decade, but it has rebounded. We're starting to see that people are starting to come together a little bit more. They're not as quite at each other's throats as they might have been a few years ago. So I guess that's something to be positive about. 58% of Americans now agree with that statement. So some positive signs that are leading us maybe to think that this is going in a different direction. Now, this is by our executive, our chief knowledge officer, Jay Walker Smith. This quote on the left-hand side, and you can read the first part yourself, but ultimately what he is saying is that the shift in values during the 1960s and 70s was toward individuality, where we champion the self above all else. And that the shift in values today is toward conscience. It's others no less than self. Now, we're not being Pollyanna. We're not saying that people are going to go fully altruistic. So don't get us wrong. But we do think that this idea that we're in the middle of some major change right now is something that you should be really paying attention to. So what does responsibility mean? Now, the most obvious thing that it means is that it means leveling the playing field. And we've seen this throughout the sports world this year. This has been one heck of a year for a lot of reasons. The social unrest that was kicked off by George Floyd's killing in May, I believe it was, it has been a major change. We've seen that play out on the sports stage. You can see the images here. You probably know them all. But some of the things that are worth pointing out are the fact that 6 years ago, the Washington Redskins said, "We will never change our name." Put it all in caps. We're not changing our name. And then what happens 5 years later? They change their name. We're seeing things that we never probably, if you had seen these as being the images at the start of the year, you might have been surprised. So it means leveling that playing field. And one of the things that we've been asked a decent amount this year is why are the sports leagues kind of putting their chips on one side of this debate or on one side of this this issue. And that's a complicated issue, and but at the end of the day, where we go to on this is that it's the future. You know, if you're really choosing between one or the other, and we don't think that's a good idea. We don't think it's a good idea to be a political brand by any means. But one thing that we do say is, you know, if you're wanting to succeed in the future, you have to understand millennials, you have to understand Gen Z, you have to understand the future customer. And as you can see on the left-hand side, demographically, they are just different than, you know, if you're a baby boomer in the audience, it's just a different world. They came of age in a different society, and we're seeing that tension play out on the scene today. Right hand side, you can see that another reason why this is happening. It's not just demographics; it's about attitudes. And you know, we ask about avid fans. 70% of avid fans consider themselves to be a supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement. That's 60% among just overall sports fans, and 50% are about non-sports fans. So some decent differences. And not only that, the more you are a sports fan, the more likely you're going to be engaged in these issues. So if you're ever wondering why that's going on, this is probably a good reason why. When we're talking about responsibility, you know, we mentioned race. Women in sports, diversity, you know, in all forms, but women, you know, this is reaching a boiling point lately. You know, the equal pay issues, the pay equity issues, how you know, obviously women in sports don't feel, in some ways they feel like they're a second-class citizen. You can see that in the data on the right-hand side there about how I wish 61% of sports fans say, I wish the culture of sports would become more inclusive of women. Now we're starting to see some good stuff. You know, the Miami Marlins hiring of Kim In-ing the other day. That was a major event, first one in major sports history. You know, that's the kind of thing that's going to be needed more in the future. But you know, beyond that, welcoming and championing, you know, the interests of women in sports, to open, you know, having a wider net, a bigger tent in sports is really what sports does, is bring people together. That's what it does best. And what we're seeing in our data, at least, is that women are not feeling like that door is necessarily open to them. Now, what else does responsibility mean? It means bridging the divide, and that is not as, you know, as easy as it may seem. You know, but we are seeing sports fans, people in general, looking to brands and businesses to play an important role in resolving the divisions of American culture and politics. But you know, one of the things that's been really interesting to watch during this whole thing is how deeply how much sports fans care about the flag. You know, they are 84% say that they are proud to be an American. That's slightly more than, you know, 77% of non-fans. When we look at strongly agree with that statement, there's an even wider gap. I believe it's 53% versus 37% of non-fans. So, you know, this is, in terms of bridging the divide, it is complicated. It is not easy. There are lots of fault lines along the way, but you know, in a lot of ways, the temperature needs to be put down a little bit, and that's one of the things that we are talking to our clients about pretty much every single day. Ultimately, where we see this going, you know, when we talk about responsibility, this is what we mean, and it really means from going from a profit-first mentality to a public-first mentality. Sports fans, consumers in general, expect businesses to have a positive effect on society. And one of the things we've been saying, you know, talking about this as being the era of public, that maybe from the 1900s to the 1960s, it was really all about your product. If you had a better product, that would win in the marketplace. More recently, it's been more about who you are as a consumer, speaking to your needs, your individuality in a lot of ways. If you promise a better self that you were going to succeed, that's how you succeeded as a brand in the past. Where we see this going is that the brands that think about the public first, that address those needs, that fill the role that sometimes are traditionally by government, but ultimately moving forward and addressing the needs of society first, that is what's going to set you apart as a brand in the future. Ultimately, when we talk about this, how can you show sports-minded consumers that you are acting in a welcoming, responsible way that will lead to a better future for all? So that's what we mean by reframing responsibility. Let's move on to our last section of today's presentation, embodying reinvention. And this is all about kind of this amazing time of innovation and change that we're living in today. So as it probably is obvious, about 1/3 of people today believe the country is on the right track. That's from Real Clear Politics, November polling. This averages a bunch of polls that are out there. That basically we're saying 32% saying that we're on the right track. And that isn't good news, obviously, but it does suggest that change is on the way. There's a academic model, Eli's conditions of change model, that the first step to initiate change is dissatisfaction with the way things are. People are dissatisfied today. You know what else is going on? They are also slowing down. That doesn't feel very, that doesn't feel familiar to me. But the fact of the matter is that nearly 2/3 of people said that they have more free time on their hands since the pandemic began, and nearly 40% say that they need a lot more time. They have a lot more time on their hands, and they're enjoying it. So people are starting to slow down. They're not happy with how things are. They're slowing down, and then they're trying new things. We're seeing things in the world of sports. We're seeing a huge online fitness boom. Some of that's obviously due to necessity. You can't go to the gym, but it'd be interesting to see how that changes, or if that flips back once this thing presumably passes. You're seeing huge gains in golf. That's been one of the funniest things for us to observe, is that one thing we've been watching for one thing we do at Kantar is look at the underlying drivers of change. And sustainability was a rising issue that we thought might really intrude on golf's growth. Also, very white user base. It had some headwinds against it. But it has grown enormously in popularity since the pandemic's first start. We're also seeing, esports rising. That's been happening for a while now, but those are things that are happening much more because of COVID-19. So again, people are not happy. They're slowing down and they're trying new things. The combination of all of those things are really ripe for innovation. Now, when we asked, this is a long time ago. This is back in April. It feels like, what is that, 7-8 months ago? It feels like 7 or 8 years ago. But we asked, when this first happened, what do you expect to be true? What do you think is going to happen 5 years from now? And this doesn't necessarily mean a lot. It doesn't mean that, that we are definitely all going to be working from home, or that, at least one more global outbreak will occur, or you can see on the list here that we'll do all our shopping online. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying, though, is that if they expect these things to happen, they are open to it. They're open to change. And, they're not being Pollyannish. They don't think that, if you look on the way bottom of the screen, they don't think that Democrats and Republicans are going to join hands and sing Kumbaya by any means, but they do see lots of things, radical things, that are going to be changed because of this. And that to us suggests that there is an openness to change that was not there before. Wrapping it all up, this is a quote I saw in the Sports Business Journal a little while ago, and I thought it was just perfect. Better than I could have said it. It was by Tony Ponturo, Ponturo Management Company. If anyone is looking to do things differently, break some rules or traditions that they felt were antiquated in today's time, this is your chance. Totally agree with that. This is the time. You wait a year from now, you're not going to be able to push through the kind of change that you can do now. This has a historical, you can see this in history. You can see it during times of volatility. This is a volatility index that's been tracking financially when times of disruption happen. You can see that, during the 2001, 2002 time period, when there's a major shock with 9/11, that was when the iPod came out. You can see in the 2008, 2009 period, that's when lots of innovation happened. Uber, Airbnb, Venmo, Mozilla. What will be the innovators of today? That is a fascinating idea, and it's one that we're going to be watching throughout this whole, as we get past this time in our history. The sports world has actually been doing a kind of amazing job of innovating. And I again, it's one of these things I don't know why it's not getting more credit for it, because it's been kind of amazing to see. You can see, Adidas, when MLS had their opener, they put a big digital logo on their field. You see that MLB, the supposedly the most staid conservative league, was experimenting with all kinds of rules changes. We already mentioned the digital fans, but that was super innovative. idea. And then you see some new, different ideas. There's lots more space in stadiums, and there's a lot of experimentation that was done. And I thought that was really interesting. These are just four of hundreds of examples. But ultimately, where we see this going, and I know that there was a conversation around, you gotta put your strategy first, and then go digital. Don't just jump into digital technology just because it's got bells and whistles. Couldn't agree more with that statement. That is absolutely true. But one thing we are seeing is that this is rapid change in the world of technology. You can see on the right-hand side, I thought that was a great quote that I saw. It was actually by the owner of the Sacramento Kings. He said that what COVID-19 has done is catapulted us into 2023. Things that were happening are just going to happen a lot faster. The biggest beneficiary of this is obviously online digital technologies. And what we think is there are lots of areas of life where you can accelerate your digital transformation. A few examples of this, so Facebook thing, I don't know if this is going to, be the answer by any means. I tend to think not, but I think it's a good first step. What they recognized, I don't know if you remember back a bunch of slides ago, we were talking about what people were feeling more because of COVID-19. That one of the answers that sports fans are more likely to be feeling is isolated. They tend to be younger. Community is a big part of being a sports fan. It's in all our data, we see that. And what they're trying to do is trying to connect sports fans in a, you got to be separate physically, but bringing people together to enjoy games together, enjoy commentary together. That's the kind of thing that if you think differently, you're gonna come up with. Another great example is UEFA. This is something that they announced a few months ago about Reimagine Football project. And basically they're saying, this is a new world and we need to think differently and we want your help to do that. So they asked, put a public statement saying how can we keep fans engaged? How do we create a safe and engaging environment for supporters? How do we enable youth and amateurs to keep playing and evolving football or enjoying football? That's another great example of taking this time and reimagining the future. We don't know what's going to come of that, but the fact that they're asking their fans, asking the community, where do we go from here is a really good sign. And then finally, you may have heard them actually talk about this. I wasn't able to join the session, but the Bucks are doing some really cool stuff. They're not the only ones. There's the Raiders are doing something really cool. Miami is doing something really cool too. But they're kind of reimagining the viewing experience for COVID, and they're saying, they're constructing these amazing visions where you can watch it in your car, watch it have an incredible viewing experience with delivery, food, and pretty amazing stuff, and altering their offerings to be more aligned with these times. And I thought the quote was really interesting too. We don't want to do this just for a COVID period of time. We think we can convert these modular shipping containers to food and beverage and cool bars very quickly. So they're not waiting for this to pass. They are understanding the future consumer needs and they are delivering upon them. So some really impressive stuff around reinvention. So ultimately, where we believe you need to think about, the big question for this section is how can you embody reinvention and create much needed change around the long-standing issues in sports? So those are the three sections. I hope I didn't go too quickly during this session. I tend to talk a little quickly sometimes. But ultimately, where we think, when you're thinking about the 2021 sports fan and how to connect with him or her, I should say, is you gotta shift your thinking around risk. You got to reframe responsibility, and you got to embody reinvention. So that is from Sports Monitor. You can see a little bit of background about Sports Monitor. We as I mentioned, we just launched this year. Subscribers get content. Pretty much every 2 weeks, you're going to get a piece of content. You can see some of that content on the screen. It's all supported with a fact-based analysis. Ultimately, what we are is we're looking to help brands who are looking to create a deeper connection with the modern sports fan. That's what we do. I'd love to talk with you if you're ever interested in any insights about the future sports marketplace. One thing to note, this is, not trying to sell you guys with anything, but just know that one thing as you look to the future, as you try to understand where things are going, and you can probably see this on the bags under my eyes, we just put to bed our first annual fan engagement study. This is going to be a tracking study that we do hopefully every year, much like US Monitor, we've been doing it for 50 years. We want to track change in the sporting world. This is our first one. 4,000 sports fans, 1,000 non-sports fans. You can see some of the details there. We're going to have that data available in mid-January 2021. We are getting really deep onto what the crazy sports world future is going to be. You can see some of the topics, fandom, the fan experiences front and center in our analysis. So again, anybody wants any more information on that, please do reach out. One thing to know, this is exciting. You can see hopefully on the screen there is that anyone who attends this conference gets a 20% discount off of any cost or any investment that you would want or you pay for accessing that data. So that is us. That is me, I guess. Steve can join it. But Ryan McConnell's my name. You see my email address right there. Please do reach out. I'd love to talk to you about anything. I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. And once again, thank you so much to Lou and Chris and the whole team at IIFX. You guys are really amazing. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ryan. This was a fascinating, journey through your research. And I think we all wonder how it will change over the next year. We know you'll keep your finger on the pulse for us and hopefully keep us up to speed with what's going on in these changes so we can plan and be ready for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
At this time, I would like to welcome Hans Davies from Toffler Associates and a key leader on the National Task Force COVID-19 Return to Work, Play, and Spectate. Toffler Associates is always looking to the future. Hans is going to help summarize our journey over the past 2 days and cast it into the future of our emerging new normal. So Hans, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Gary. And I appreciate it. Thank you to Lou and IIFX and everyone who's out there. We have had an amazing 2 days. I don't even have time. I recognize that my role sits between you and most likely whatever evening or traditional beverage you feel like enjoying. So I want to keep my comments short and sweet. But what I want to try to do is kind of summarize and wrap all this up in a little bit of a bow as we look forward into that future that we're talking about. But before I even get started, I told Lou I was going to do this. I have to give a shout out to all of my fellow EAFs from the 1995 Williams College soccer team on the 25th anniversary of our national championship. So, I couldn't pass up that opportunity. So if there's anyone out there, go EAFs. Listen, what we are talking about right now is we're hearing a lot about a US-centric view, but what I want to do for the next about 10 minutes is take it up to that global level, right? When we talk about the innovations that are coming in fan experience, when we're talking about the people, the process, and the technologies that are going to be relevant in the next 5, even 10 years, it's critical that we think about global forces, right? I want to share a couple things to get you thinking about that global force. And Ryan, I really appreciate the insights you provided from a detailed fan perspective that reminds us that there's data that can back these things. But in a sense, it's about the fan, right? I heard a lot of conversations this week, the last 2 days, about a customer versus a fan. And I want people to remember it's about the fan. It's about not just that professional league, not even the NCAA or the organized sports. Part of what we're talking about is how do we also create and get people back to that joy of playing, right? That joy of being out on the pitch or in the field there. So think about this from a global perspective. What is going on when we see all of these changes that are coming, and what does it mean? So a couple things I want folks to think about, right? The first is we're seeing, and again, Ryan, you highlighted this well, these shifts and these changes. Where does that power lie? Right? The fans have more power than they ever did. They have ability to influence that product on the field in ways we never thought possible. That's not just for sports. That's also from a consumer perspective. It's from an international perspective. That's a changing nature of the way we're dealing with our interaction between those that are demanding a service and those that are providing that service. And that's an important thing to keep in mind globally. It's not just in the US that we're seeing these shifts, right? A changing model is throughout. This idea of infrastructure adaptation. I loved the previous session. Phil did a great job moderating that. Intel, Microsoft, the Milwaukee Bucks were looking at what infrastructure adaptation really looks like. It's not just that people are showing up at a old school industrial stadium. We're looking at the convergence of physical, cyber, and human infrastructure now when it comes to creating that fan experience. You're not just bringing the fan into a dead facility to look at a product that is alive. You're bringing them into a whole interactive experience that engages mind, body, and soul. What does that do? That introduces a little element of risk. I'm sure for anyone, Phil from Johnson Controls is going to say, yeah, we're a little nervous about things like SCADA, building management systems, and all the other things that go in there. So that wonderful way to engage fans in the future is introducing that complexity. But again, globally, we're seeing that as Qatar is building for the World Cup, Japan preparing for the delayed Olympics, we're seeing these things in action, right? Societal collisions. Ryan, I appreciated the detail on that. But again, globally, we are seeing a shift in expectations that clash with the traditional shared assumptions and social norms. This isn't just generational. This is global. This is about the question of Brexit. This is about the question of gender in sports. This is about the question of issues that tear at the very fabric of our society, right? And we have to understand again that these are not surprising. These are things we should expect. And when we're thinking about the future, when we're looking over the horizon, we shouldn't be surprised that people see these things differently and we see the divergence, and that divergence is creating a friction. So even though we're talking about sports, sports is in very much a reflection of the world in which we find ourselves. And we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about that fan experience. And finally, biodigital convergence. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but what you see now is the athlete and the fan are not just doing the wearables 5-10 years from now. You're actually integrating that into their physical being. You're seeing right now the way we can do with medical science. We have pacemakers. We have arthroscopic surgery. We have things that didn't exist 50 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. But when you talk about biodigital convergence, imagine the athlete who isn't wearing your Amazon Web Services data fantasticness or Intel or Microsoft. It's actually in them. It is a part of who they are, and they have agreed to that in exchange for their salary, in exchange for other things that they're getting. It becomes something we can experience. You're actually seeing that. And what we're seeing in our research is we're finding that sports is becoming a much more virtual experience. But while we think of that as virtual reality and goggles, you should be thinking about that much more as a live mental and physical experience. I can attach the electrodes to you, put you in a pod, mimic sunlight through artificial lighting, and then give you a virtual reality experience that will actually stimulate your muscles. What does that mean for the future of sport? What does that mean for the supply chain of your athletes and the supply chain of your fans and what they expect, right? So I want to take all that and I want to pull it down a little bit to look at what we see as some threats that we've really heard a lot about. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but we talked about biocognitive mayhem. Look, COVID is here. It is going to go away. We hear about the vaccines around the corner, but we need to think about how it's shaping the world in which we live. We're going to have to respond to that, but not just COVID. What's the next biocognitive mayhem? What's the next thing that's going to affect our physical ability to go and enjoy games? One of the things we talked about, and I heard over the last 2 days, is not exactly, but this theory of trust erosion. Who do you trust? How are you communicating your health, your safety, your security, and your service objectives? Where are your trusted institutions and who are your trusted voices? That's going to be very important as we move forward, right? This idea of mobility paralysis. You have a stadium, you have an entertainment district. Usually we think of things that move as a threat. What if everything is moving? What does that mean for you in the future when you're thinking about the security of those things? The analog anxiety, we can't student body left on any one thing. We have to think about those things that exist. We have to think about the active shooter. These are all the kinds of things when you're in that security space you're trying to think about. Neo-environmental disruption is all about climate change, but it's also about man-made changes that we're driving. Cloud seeding in Qatar, what we're doing in China to manage the environment, that's going to have impact, right? Just as much as a natural disaster has a heavy impact on any stadium or any activity that's in its path, right? And finally, digital disarray. As you hear all of this dependence on the digital, on camera angles, on IPv6, on all of those other things we're relying on, what happens when it goes down? How are we being resilient? And again, that's one of the things that we talked about over the last 2 days, looking at that effort to be resilient. But it's not all dark threat, right? We want to look at the ecosystem of the products we're putting on the field for the fans, right? We talk about fans, we know they're paying customers, but again, it's about that fan experience. Look at the product that any league is putting on that pitch, the ice, whatever you might say, right? Look at their ecosystem. Do you, as a security leader, as a health leader, as a revenue driver, do you understand the product you're putting on the field, the kind of athlete performance technology that's going to emerge over the next couple of years? I'm not just talking about the physical things, but also the mind, body, and spirit that we can be focusing on. The leagues and the owners, they're going to be new revenue models, new revenue streams. We see gambling now becoming part of that, right? The stadium experience technology that we talked about, the media and the broadcasting technology that's out there to get your product to the public. What do they care about? When you're thinking about the future opportunities, I challenge you to think about your ecosystem. You can fill this out any way you want to, right? But you need to be thinking about your ecosystem. I think it was Sandra from Intel who said it really well. Don't just chase the technology. How does it fit into your overall strategy and what you seek to achieve? Because that's what we want to do for the fan. That's what's out there. And that's what we've heard for the last 2 days. But you've got to understand the ecosystem, the physical structure, the cyber, the people, the process, all of those things that are going to be relevant to where you want to go. But it's out there and you can get it done, right? We talked about this, and this is from Toffler Associates. This is from back in March. We all have our little mental models for this, but I want to remind folks that we know a vaccine is around the corner. And I just pulled this data, and Ryan, you might have different data, but it said that 2/3 of survey respondents said they would not attend an indoor sporting event without a vaccine. If you just go to sports fans, that's 60%, right? Last week, 72% of Americans said they were unwilling to attend any kind of sporting event without the availability of a vaccine. We are going to be in this great wait period, even when we find our vaccine, because we're going to figure things out. Don't assume you're going to jump from lockdown, vaccine, new normal, right? We sometimes want to sublimate to stability, and we have to recognize what Ryan talked about and all that data. We're going to have some time to reunite and revitalize. We're going to have to figure out what that new level looks like, and that's going to be critical. You need to be thinking about when the vaccine shows up, what does that reunite and revitalize period look like until we get to the novel normal? When are people going to feel comfortable? When will they believe that things are safe? So what can you do about this? Right? Well, I happen to be part of the task force that Lou led, and I want to show you one of the products we came up with because I'm pretty proud of it. And I think it's really important in a way you use it. At Toffler Associates, we always talk about the future, and the future is about people. And I want to remind you that it's about feeling safer and being safer, promoting that health and safety at sports and entertainment events. But again, as Ryan said, how do you build that confidence? One of the ways we like to do that is through scenario planning and exercises, right? What would you do here? Imagine if. Pick any one of the threats you see up there. Is it a virus? Is it a bio? Is it social unrest? Is there an active shooter? You want to look at what is that threat that you want to deal with. And I would encourage you not to deal with one thing, because as Gary and I always joke together, what happens if there's a lightning storm and you're social distancing? How do you social distance when you're sheltering in place? But think about who's impacted. We talked about the journey. Who are your stakeholders? You have spectators, the spectator support staff, the event staff, and the athlete in town. They all have different perspectives. They all have things that mean something to them. What does that mean to you? And what is the journey? How does that fit into your strategy, right? The digital journey. Don't forget the tools that are there to create that experience for your fans as they come into your physical location, or their physical location is your digital equivalent. They're in their home. Where are they coming from? How are they getting to that place? Whether they're moving physically or whether they're in their home. And then how are they getting to and from the event? Right? What is their mode of transport? Because again, that's a big risk. You own that journey. That's one of the things we heard, I think, throughout the 2 days. You cannot, when thinking about the fan experience, only think about being in a seat or being on their couch. What is their journey? Think about this from the hospitality industry. They no longer look at large swaths of populations. They want to target Hans. Hans wants to show up. Here's how he likes to travel. Here's the burger he likes when he shows up in his hotel room, right? So you need to own that journey. And then what are they doing at the event and where are they doing that? Walk through it, right? What are they doing when they're at home? What are they doing when they're at your stadium? And finally, who are the critical partners? How are you going to build your environment to make that more useful and make it more relevant? You have to be relying on those stakeholders. So that's really what I have seen over the last 2 days and how I think the important role of that fan experience is going to go into 2030. And again, Lou, Gary, the whole team at IIFX, I echo Ryan's comments. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. I had a blast. And Gary, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close this out, or to Lou to close this out. I got you both on my screen. I don't know who to go to.
Gary, go to Gary.
Gary, you go.
Well, thanks, Hans. I think that was a great summarization over the last 2 days. And you and Ryan definitely complemented one another in this presentation. Obviously, this is an extraordinarily complex time for sports and entertainment industry and all the people in the world, be their fans or be they the entities that put on this forms of entertainment. We look forward to the day when conditions are such that great spectacles of large sports and entertainment events are common again. I think we all want that. People with great vision can already see the future and are building it. And I think this forum, this conference, went a long way to helping that vision and helping people see the way through to build it.